She was 10 years of age when she announced to him that she would one day become his wife. He laughed, a genuine, unhurried sound, dipped his head in acknowledgement, and then erased her from his memory entirely. She did not return the favour. Not at 15, not at 18, not across a full decade spent at a school in Bath, where his image settled into the quiet margins of her evenings like dust on a windowsill. And when she finally returned to London at the age of 20, she carried with her only one question that demanded an answer. Had she spent 10 years devoted to a man, or merely to a ghost? He was 40 years of age. He had informed his mother, his club, and every soul who thought to ask that he considered himself far too advanced in years to choose a bride, that the proper season for such endeavours had long since slipped beyond his reach. What he had concealed from everyone, and most thoroughly from himself, was the truth that no woman had ever stirred within him the sensation he believed he ought to feel. Until the evening, a young woman stepped into his library, her attention fixed upon the bookshelves rather than upon him, and something fell silent in a corner of his mind. Subscribe and leave a comment. Have you ever found yourself waiting for someone who had no knowledge of your vigil? Certain moments in a person's life pass so swiftly, arrive so utterly without ceremony, that they vanish before anyone thinks to mark them. A door left ajar, a name spoken by accident, a sentence completed before anyone could object. The night of October the 17th, in the year 1800, belonged to that breed of moment. It arrived dressed in candlelight and the fragrance of roasted pheasant, tidily folded within an evening the world had no cause to remember. Lady Whitmore's autumnal dinner was by every reliable account among the more distinguished affairs of the season. The drawing-room of Whitmore House on Grosvenor Square had been arranged with the sole and deliberate purpose of dazzling people who already owned too much, the most difficult audience there is. Crystal caught the tremor of 50 flames and scattered light in every direction. Conversation moved between courses with the regulated elegance of a river that knows its banks. Purposeful, contained, never permitted to spill. Duke Maximilian Royce, the 9th Duke of Ashvale, arrived at precisely 7:30. He became the centre of gravity at once, not through any effort of his own, through simple arithmetic. A gentleman of 30 years, unwed, bearing one of the most ancient titles in England, and possessing a fortune that required 3 separate accountants to manage. Such a man bends the room around himself without trying. The ladies smiled a fraction too wide. The mothers lifted their chins by careful degrees. Even the gentlemen shifted their posture without realizing it, as though standing near such a figure required something straighter in the spine. Maximilian bore all of it with a patience bred not from goodness, but from long exposure. He had no cause to believe this evening would distinguish itself from any other. He had moved through these drawing-rooms since the age of 19. He recognized every shade of performance on display, every manufactured laugh, every glance delivered from beneath artfully lowered lashes. He held no bitterness toward it. He simply watched. And in watching, he had learned to keep a deliberate margin between himself and the counterfeit warmth that everyone around him labored so urgently to produce. Sometime after the second course, he extracted himself from a particularly relentless conversation about hunting estates and made for the corridor. Fewer candles burned here than in the drawing-room. That was precisely the appeal. He stood beside the window at the far end, looking down at the square below, grateful for 30 seconds of silence. Nothing more. He sensed her before he saw her. A small sound, not quite a gasp, closer to the breath of someone discovered in the middle of something they knew they should not be doing. He turned. She stood at the top of the servants' staircase, half swallowed by shadow. She had clearly come down from the floor above, where the younger members of the household had been tucked into bed hours ago. 10 years old, perhaps, a white nightgown, dark hair spilling loose past her shoulders. Her eyes found his, and what struck him was the stillness behind them. A composure so complete it separated her from every soul he had spoken to that evening. Most children, caught wandering through a house full of adults, would have bolted, or wept. This one simply watched him, studied him really, with the careful gravity of a person weighing a newly discovered problem. Then she stepped forward into the candlelight as though she had every right to occupy it. __, quote, _0 __. Not a question, a classification. He discovered, with faint surprise, that he was not remotely annoyed. Quote 1. Quote 2. She said it with the unshakable conviction of someone stating a plain truth that owed no one an apology. __, quote _3 __. He studied her. She held his gaze without a flicker of unease, without the tremor, the pretense, the careful performance every other person beneath that roof had offered him all evening. There was something quietly healing in her plainness of manner. Quote 4. Quote 5. A small, purposeful silence. Quote 6. Quote 7. Quote 8. Ada inclined her head slightly. Her expression carried no cruelty, as though she were offering this intelligence as practical guidance rather than accusation. A sound left him then, a sound he had not made in a very long time. A real laugh, short, startled out of him, and wholly unguarded. __, quote _9 __. Ada weighed his words for a moment. Then, with the distilled honesty that belongs only to children and the very old, she looked up at him and announced, Row 10. The warmth of that laughter still lived somewhere behind his ribs. He gave her a slight bow, the kind a gentleman offers when he means to honor a declaration without diminishing it. __, quote _11 __. She nodded, visibly satisfied, and turned to climb the stairs once more. At the top, she paused, glanced back over her shoulder. __, quote _12 __. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness overhead. Maximilian lingered in the corridor a beat longer than he needed to. A solitary, private smile settled across his mouth, and he returned to the drawing room, the dinner party, the life already arranged around him like furniture in a house he had never truly chosen. By the following morning, he had forgotten her entirely. This is the part that matters. Ada Pemberton did not forget. 3 weeks after that dinner, she was enrolled at Miss Hartley's Seminary for Young Ladies in Bath, an institution that took quiet pride in shaping women of refinement, composure, and suitable ambition. The school occupied a handsome Georgian building on a peaceful street, ringed by gardens that were lovely and completely forbidden to students from October through April. Bath was not London. Its fashionable society skewed older, moved slower, carried a gentler pulse. Yet it sat far enough from Grosvenor Square that a 10-year-old girl could tend a private thought without prying questions, and close enough to the civilized world that she might grow into something more. She grew, year upon year, season upon season, with the same patient, unhurried deliberateness that marked everything she did. She was not the most beautiful girl at Miss Hartley's. Beauty flourished in abundance there, taking 1,000 different shapes. But Ada possessed something rarer, something more dangerous in its quiet way. She was compelling, and that quality, over time, proved far more useful than mere prettiness ever could. She consumed books the way flames consume dry kindling, without pause, without satiation. Her arguments arrived precise, layered, constructed with the care of a mason setting stone. She had learned the power of silence, not because words failed her, because she understood, younger than anyone should, that knowing when to speak is its own kind of brilliance. She regarded Duke Maximilian Royce the way a sailor regards a fixed star on the horizon. Not obsession, navigation. He was never a fantasy she had spun from air and longing. He was a point she had chosen at an age far too tender for such certainty, and then confirmed that choice again, year after deliberate year. That was the part she never revealed, the choosing itself. She knew, with the sharp-edged practicality Miss Hartley's seminary for young ladies had laboured to instill, and had, perhaps by accident, genuinely achieved, that he would not remember her. A man of the Duke of Ashvale's position moved through society the way a river carves through terrain. He shaped everything around him. He retained none of it. She had been a child of 10, glimpsed in a corridor. She was not foolish enough to imagine she had left any impression beyond a passing, forgettable pleasantness. But she was returning to London. Her parents had designated the 1810 season as her debut. The letters arriving from her mother throughout the winter of 1809 hummed with preparations, logistics, and the unmistakable trembling excitement of a woman who had waited years to launch her daughter into the world and could now taste how close it was. Ada read these letters in her room at Miss Hartley's, by the window, with a stillness her mother would have found deeply suspicious had she been there to witness it. She felt no dread about the season, no fluttering nerves over dinners or assemblies or the parade of potential suitors. Her mind held only one thing. One fixed, burning thing. She was going to see him again, and whatever followed, whatever the living man turned out to be, whatever distance yawned between memory and reality, she would finally know. She would have her answer. She packed her trunk at the end of March, 1810, with the precision of someone who had no plans to come back. 10 years. She had waited a full decade. And patience, she had learned at Miss Hartley's, was nothing like resignation. Patience was simply waiting with your eyes open. The Duke of Ashvale had not softened his position on marriage. If anything, he had fortified it. He was 40 years of age in the spring of 1810. 40. A number his mother, the Dowager Duchess, had evidently marked as a line in the sand. She made her position perfectly clear over breakfast in January, calm as a clock striking the hour. Maximilian, for his part, sat buried in correspondence, wishing ardently to be left alone. He did not look up from his papers. Maximilian. His name in his mother's mouth carried a specific weight that even at 40 could still make him go still. You need an heir. The estate demands continuity, and quite honestly, I have grown tired of inventing reasons for your bachelorhood at supper. He lowered his papers, fixed her with the expression he kept for conversations he meant to end quickly. I am too old, he said, every syllable placed with care, like a man stepping across ice, to begin the business of choosing a wife. The window has closed. The proper time for such things ended 15 years ago. I simply failed to notice. The Dowager Duchess held his gaze. A long, unblinking moment stretched between them. That, she said finally, is the most convenient lie you have ever told yourself. And she left the room, wielding the most devastating weapon in her arsenal. He sat with her parting words far longer than pride would allow him to admit. He was no stranger to his own devices. A sharp, discerning mind had been his since boyhood. Time had only honed the blade. He knew, with the quiet certainty of a man too intelligent for his own comfort, that his cynicism was architecture. A fortress built brick by careful brick from every fruitless season, every year spent moving through drawing rooms without finding the thing he could not yet name. He understood his mother was right. He simply found it easier to lie to himself about it. The spring season opened in April. He attended, as he always did, the assemblies, the dinners, the afternoon calls. All performed with the practiced efficiency of a man who had perfected the art of presence without proximity. He offered smiles. He danced once each evening, usually with the hostess or her eldest daughter, whoever stood to gain the most from the honor and read the least into it. He left before midnight. The same ritual, the same clockwork departure, year upon year. A flawless performance of engagement that had, somewhere along the way, become impossible to distinguish from pure indifference. Lady Whitmore's spring dinner fell on the 22nd of April. It was the 14th time Maximilian had crossed that particular threshold. He arrived, drew immediate attention, endured it, then sought the library, a stolen breath of solitude between the soup and the fish courses, when the butler materialized in the doorway. 21. The man announced to the room at large as two young women followed him in from the anteroom. Maximilian glanced up from the title page of a book he had not yet begun to read. She stood on the left, dark hair arranged with care, not loose, and something in the set of her jaw, something in the particular quality of her stillness, struck him like a word hovering at the edge of memory. Familiar, unplaceable. She was 20 years old, composed with the deliberate poise of a woman who had spent years perfecting exactly that quality. And she was not looking at him. Her gaze had settled on the bookshelves. He found this almost absurdly disarming. Every soul he had encountered across a decade of seasons turned toward him the instant he entered a room, pulled as though by some unseen gravity. This woman had walked into a room he already occupied, fully aware of his presence. The butler had made certain of that, and had chosen the bookshelves instead. He watched her eyes travel the spines with unmistakable interest. He caught the faint movement of her lips as she read the titles to herself in silence. He saw her head tilt toward one volume in particular, as though it had whispered something worth considering. Her sister murmured something low. Ada turned then, unhurried, graceful, and her gaze moved across the room until it found him. No flutter, no performance, simply recognition. Or something that wore its shape convincingly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 23, underscore, underscore. The greeting was calibrated with such precision that it carried courtesy and absolutely nothing beyond it. He inclined his head. Quote, 24. 10 years spent in Bath. A beat of silence passed. Quote, 25. Something shifted inside him. Pemberton, Lady Whitmore's niece. He turned the arithmetic over slowly, like a key pressed into a lock that almost yields. The tumblers catching, nearly engaging, but not quite falling into place. The answer did not come. Not yet. What came instead was this. He stood in the library of Whitmore House, an unopened book in his hand, while Ada Pemberton regarded him with 20-year-old eyes that seemed to be waiting for something he had not yet realized he owed. He thought about her for 3 days after that dinner. This unsettled him considerably. He was not a man who lingered on people. They crossed paths 7 times over the following 3 weeks. Maximilian counted each occasion, then was irritated with himself for having done so. The Hargreave ball on the 1st of May, the afternoon concert at Mrs. at Drummond's residence on the 7th. Then a chance meeting at Hatchard's on the 9th. He had gone in search of political pamphlets and found her instead, tucked at the far end of the fiction section, absorbed in a volume she made no effort to set aside when he appeared. He was forced to clear his throat. She glanced up without the faintest trace of self-consciousness and asked what he thought of Fielding. He held no particular opinion. Yet somehow, standing there, he began constructing one. He started accepting invitations he had previously refused. He told himself it was coincidence, then curiosity, then a reasonable broadening of his social duties. By the third lie, he had stopped trying to deceive himself at all and simply showed up. The other young ladies of the season noticed. His mother noticed. The gentleman at his club offered remarks he parried with the ease of 20 years' practice in deflection. Society, that single breathing organism, observed that the Duke of Ashvale, the man who had pronounced himself too old, too finished to begin anything new, was materializing with unsettling regularity wherever a certain Miss Pemberton happened to stand. Society found this enormously entertaining. It always does. Ada, for her part, gave him almost nothing to grasp. This, he was slowly realizing, was entirely intentional. She was pleasant the way a sharp-minded woman chooses to be pleasant. Present, attentive, genuinely engaged in conversation, yet she extended him not a single degree of warmth beyond what propriety required. No surplus familiarity, no contrived availability, no charged glances designed to draw him further in. She treated him with perfect, maddening consistency. He was a gentleman she had encountered at a dinner party, nothing more. She offered no acknowledgement whatsoever of the pointed attention he kept directing her way. He found this unbearable in a manner words refused to capture. It was at the Ashworth Musicale on the 14th of May that he finally succeeded in placing himself beside her long enough for a conversation that mattered. The Musicale was that particular species of event where the music existed purely as pretext, an excuse for 50 people to occupy one room, communicating sidelong with their eyes while pretending to listen to a soprano. He had claimed the aisle seat next to her before she registered his intent. This gave him a small, probably undeserving flicker of satisfaction. "You do not strike me as a gentleman who enjoys music." Her voice was low. She did not look at him. The soprano was moving through an introductory passage. "I appreciate certain kinds of music." His reply was just as quiet. "I find myself enjoying this particular evening far more than most." She said nothing. The soprano began Handel, a ceremonial piece, perhaps too grave for the lightness of the room. Around them, listeners arranged their features into masks of careful absorption, as though working very hard to appear moved. "You attended Miss Hartley's in Bath," he said. 10 years, from 1800. It was a statement, not a question. She received it as one. "I left in March of 1801. He turned the number over in his mind. He had been 30 in 1800. He had attended Lady Whitmore's dinner in October of that year. A corridor, guttering candlelight. A 10-year-old girl in a white nightgown, dark hair loose and unbound, standing at the top of the servants' staircase. He turned toward her. She was watching the soprano. Her profile was composed, utterly still, revealing nothing at all. And yet there was something in that stillness, something that did not quite belong to the word calm. It raised the fine hairs along his forearms. "Miss Pemberton." A pause. "Have we met before this season?" A beat. Not hesitation, a deliberate choice being made. Then she turned her head and looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that had kept their patience for a decade. "Once," she said, "or a very long time ago." She turned back to the music. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the darkness of Ashvale House in Berkeley Square, staring at the ceiling, pulling at a thread of memory he could not quite seize. Something in a corridor, the smell of candle wax, a laugh that had caught him off guard, a voice carrying a composure far too settled for its age. He finally seized the thread at 4 o'clock in the morning. It came apart all at once, and the memory surfaced whole. A small girl, barefoot, possessed of a gravity no child should own, dark hair spilling around her shoulders, gazing up at him with that identical stillness Ada Pemberton carried into every room she entered. Speaking without a flicker of self-consciousness, without the faintest awareness that her words were extraordinary. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 35, underscore, underscore. And he, laughing, had promised to wait. A jest, nothing more. He lay motionless for a long while after that, turning the memory over, examining its weight. He had laughed and let it go. She, at 10 years of age, had done what? Clung to it? Built something around it? He had no way of knowing. She had offered him nothing. Nothing except that single word, quote, 36, spoken with the patience of someone who had been rehearsing one particular discipline of restraint for years upon years. He told himself it carried no meaning. Children make extraordinary declarations and forget them by tea time. He settled this conclusion with absolute certainty, then lay awake until dawn broke, his thoughts circling back, relentlessly, to her hands, folded with such deliberate care in her lap during the earlier encounter, to the peculiar manner in which she studied bookshelves when she believed no one was watching. Lady Drummond's garden party on the 28th of May was exactly the sort of afternoon the English social calendar might have been engineered to produce, designed to press people together in close quarters while offering no legitimate excuse for private conversation. The grounds brimmed with guests, 80 perhaps more, drifting across immaculate lawns beneath a sky that had, for once in late May, committed itself to being entirely cooperative. Small tables bore lemonade and delicate pastries, both largely ignored. Near the rose beds at the far edge, a string quartet sent melodies drifting across the grass, agreeable enough to appreciate, undemanding enough to disregard. It was there, among the wisteria, that Maximilian found Ada. She stood with her body turned slightly from the crowd, her gaze fixed on the climbing vine with that quality of genuine absorption he had learned to recognize. The same precise intensity she brought to every subject she examined, a sharpness entirely unlike the polite, skimming interest most people afforded the world. Her sister was occupied elsewhere on the lawn, deep in conversation with a circle of younger guests. For the first time he could recall, Ada was alone. He was moving toward her before the decision had fully taken shape in his mind. She turned. Sunlight struck her face directly, and she did not flinch from it, did not raise a hand to shield her eyes, simply stood in the brightness. That small, unremarkable gesture sent something tightening behind his ribs, an unfamiliar pressure. "Your Grace," he began. She waited, entirely composed. He wanted to say something direct, something honest, something that might close the distance between what he now understood and her careful, practiced silence. Instead, he asked whether she found the wisteria pleasing. The corner of her mouth shifted, not quite a smile, something neighbouring one. "I was studying its form," she said. "How it climbs. It wraps itself so stubbornly around whatever it seizes that, past a certain point, one can no longer tell which is supporting which." He looked at the wisteria, then back at her. "That is a remarkably exact observation for a garden party." "I am a rather exact person," she replied, no apology in her voice, a fact plainly stated. Silence fell between them, and like every silence they had begun to share, it held far more than the mere absence of sound. The party swirled on around them, its laughter and social choreography unceasing. Neither of them gave it a moment's notice. 42, he said. The words had not been planned. They had simply risen, and he let them go. A fine shift passed across her expression. It was not surprise. It was the precise opposite. A deep stillness overtook her, the kind that belongs to someone who has been waiting for exactly this collision and now refuses to flinch from it. She held his gaze for a stretch of time dense with unspoken feeling, layered and alive. She said, her voice gave nothing away. She answered, plain and unhurried. The question clawed at the inside of his chest. He wanted to ask it outright, to say. He said none of it. 4 decades of carefully maintained restraint made direct questions feel like stripping off armor in the middle of a battle. Instead, he managed. She confirmed. That near smile surfaced again, sharper this time. There was something instructive in it. Their exchange was severed, as their exchanges so often were, by the intrusion of others carrying their own purposes. Lady Ashworth appeared with a young lord in tow who required an introduction. The fragile closeness between them dissolved, mist slipping through an open window. And yet Maximilian lingered in the garden long after Ada had been drawn away. His gaze rested on the wisteria. He turned the word quote 51 over in his mind, weighing what it meant from a woman who chose every syllable with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that words possess weight. By the first week of June, quiet speculation had hardened into common knowledge. The Duke of Ashvale was courting Miss Ada Pemberton. This conclusion, accurate in its destination, if somewhat hazy regarding its origin, drew the full range of reactions polite society reliably produces. Mothers of unmarried daughters nursed their disappointment in silence. Young men who had begun circling Ada with tentative interest now pressed their attentions harder, sensing by instinct that the window they had spotted might close sooner than expected. Lady Whitmore moved through her days wrapped in unmistakable self-congratulation, claiming quiet credit for a connection she had neither engineered nor, in all honesty, foreseen. Ada's mother arrived from the country during June's second week, drawn by a sequence of carefully composed, yet pointedly vague letters from Lady Whitmore, the kind that could only herald significant news. She assessed the situation the moment she stepped through the door, reading it with the practiced eye of a woman who had studied society's machinery for 30 years. At the first opportunity, she took her daughter gently by the arm and asked for the truth. Ada paused, not from reluctance, from thought. "He is exactly what I expected," she said at last, "and nothing like what I imagined." Her mother waited. "He keeps himself guarded. He has built a world of precision around himself and lives inside it as though it satisfies him. I do not think he can name a desire without immediately raising walls around it." "Most men his age are the same," her mother observed, practical as ever. "I know that," Ada replied, turning the thought slowly. "What concerns me is whether he has already decided the answer is no, before he has allowed himself to understand the question." Her mother studied her daughter, 20 years old now, a decade of quiet endurance behind her, and that unmistakable thread of resolve that had been visible even at 10, even shivering in corridors wearing nothing but a nightgown. She said nothing. Sometimes silence is answer enough. Elsewhere, a young viscount by the name of Hereford had resolved to set caution aside. Lord Edmund Hereford, 28 years of age, possessed an uncomplicated handsomeness, a pleasant estate in Shropshire, and a temperament that could be generously called straightforward, or, less generously, simple. Through those first weeks of the season, he had watched Ada from across crowded rooms. Then, over the fortnight that followed, he narrowed that distance with quiet, deliberate purpose. By the 9th of June, a card party at Greystone, his intentions had grown impossible to mistake. He seated himself beside her at the card table. He remained there for 3 hours. He was attentive, engaging, genuinely curious about her thoughts, and remarkably unafraid to say what he meant. Ada found, to her own mild surprise, that she liked him. There was an ease about Lord Hereford that Maximilian simply did not possess. A warmth offered freely. No excavation required, no careful peeling back of fortified layers just to reach something human underneath. Maximilian arrived late to the card party. It took him roughly 30 seconds to understand everything. He had never believed himself a jealous man. This was not wishful thinking. It was a considered assessment, built upon 40 years of never once encountering the sensation. He discovered, standing in the doorway of the greystone card room, watching Lord Hereford lean close enough to murmur something that made Ada laugh. He discovered that his lifelong conviction had simply been waiting for the right provocation. What moved through him was deeply unsettling, not the kind of feeling he could govern with composure, not something a well-placed sentence could deflect. It lodged in his chest like a spark struck from flint. He played cards on the far side of the room. He conversed. He smiled at the appropriate moments. And every 10 minutes, his gaze drifted back across the room. Lord Hereford was still there. Ada was still laughing. The knot behind his ribs did not loosen. He left at 11 without speaking a word to her. He walked home through the dimming June twilight, reaching Ashvale House in a state of mind he was too proud to name, but too perceptive to misunderstand. He shut himself in his study, settled into the chair behind his desk, and for the first time, without flinching, examined the path he was on. He was 40 years old. He had told his mother, told himself, told anyone who bothered to ask. The right moment had passed. He had built a remarkably sturdy fortress of resignation around himself, lived inside it for years, and known, if not happiness precisely, then at least shelter from the particular ache that comes with wanting something beyond reach. And now, Ada Pemberton, 20 years old, a declaration made at 10, still hovering somewhere in the silence between them. And on her other side, a young Viscount, uncomplicated, open-hearted, ready to offer her a simple life and simple love. He wanted her, not as some distant ideal, not as a pleasant interruption in an otherwise predictable season. He wanted her specifically. The way she tilted her head when absorbed in a book, the deliberation with which she chose each word, the sharpness of her attention when wisteria caught her eye, her absolute refusal to give him anything he had not earned. He had been circling this truth for 6 weeks. He was done circling. The question that remained was singular. What did he intend to do about it? And whether a decade of careful, calculated stillness had already cost him everything. On the morning of the 15th of June, substantial news arrived at the Pemberton household. Lord Edmund Hereford had sent a formal letter to Ada's father, currently away from London, expected back within the week, declaring his serious interest in her. Nothing was official yet, no decisions had been sealed, but the letter existed, and Lady Whitmore relayed its contents over breakfast with a proprietary satisfaction, as though the mere closing of a chapter constituted a proper ending. Ada read the letter, set it down, finished her breakfast. She thought of Lord Hereford and his easy warmth, his estate in Shropshire, where wisteria probably wound itself around perfectly sensible trellises, asking nothing complicated of anyone. She considered the possibility that such a life could be genuinely wonderful. And then her mind turned to Maximilian Royce, the man who had remembered her at 4 in the morning, a full 3 weeks after that musical performance, and apologized for the delay. The man who, for 6 solid weeks, had orbited her with the careful restraint of someone unsure whether he possessed any right to draw closer. A man who had declared himself, publicly, repeatedly, with striking conviction, far too old to be choosing a bride, and yet, in that same breath, had kept appearing wherever she happened to be, with the reliable certainty of a compass needle swinging north. She had been patient long enough. The Langley afternoon reception on the 16th of June was a sprawling, informal affair. Roughly 30 people scattered themselves across 2 drawing rooms and a conservatory. The kind of gathering where private conversation could unfold without attracting notice. Ada arrived alongside her sister and mother, exchanged pleasantries with several acquaintances, and then, when the right moment presented itself, she slipped toward the conservatory. She knew he would be there. Maximilian always gravitated toward the quieter margins of any social event. And conservatories offered the most defensible of those margins. He stood near the palm trees, his gaze fixed on the small walled garden beyond the glass. He turned when she entered. Something flickered across his features. Relief, she thought, or its nearest relation. Then his familiar composure settled back into place, a curtain drawn shut. She stopped several feet from him. The conservatory stood empty of other guests. Through the glass panes, the garden stretched green and tranquil under afternoon light. She began. A single nod. She drew a breath, not from nerves, but from the sharp, gathered focus that marked everything she did. She continued. He did not move. Her eyes held his without wavering. Her voice shifted, not quieter, but lower in intensity, a flame burning down without going dark. She said. The conservatory held perfect silence. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door swung open. A sharp burst of laughter from the drawing room cut through the stillness. Then the door closed. Quiet returned. He looked at her, and she watched something vast shift behind his eyes. She could not name it precisely, but its presence was unmistakable. 40 years of painstakingly constructed detachment, meeting something it had never been built to withstand. He opened his mouth, closed it again. An expression crossed his face, unguarded. Almost raw, something she had never once seen from him. And then he spoke her name. Nothing more. Every trace of composure had been stripped from the word. His voice carried a rough edge she had never heard before. She said, I remember everything. The candles. You told me not to stand near cold windows or I would catch a chill. I have thought about that every single day for the past 6 weeks, and I did not understand what it meant until roughly 2 hours ago. I laughed. You said something true, and I laughed, and I forgot. And I have been a fool for 10 years in ways I am only now beginning to catalogue. __quote _7 3 __. I am 40 years old. I have spent a great deal of energy persuading myself and everyone around me that wanting something was no longer a possibility available to me. I was wrong. Specifically and entirely wrong about this ___quote _7 4 __. About you ___ quote _7 5 __. I told you I would wait for you ___ quote _7 6 __. I said it as a joke in a corridor when I was 30, foolish, unaware of the truth hiding inside my own words. I would like to say it now, and mean it, if you'll let me. She descended those last 3 steps, close enough now to see the unsteadiness of his breathing, to notice that his hands, bare, no hat, no gloves, trembled. This man who had made composure into a creed, this man for whom steadiness was not a trait, but an entire philosophy. I have been waiting 10 years for this, she whispered. He heard it. All 10 years compressed into 4 words. The choosing, and then choosing again. The patience that had never once been surrender. Something inside him broke at those words. Quietly, without spectacle. The way ice fractures in early spring, not with force, but with the slow, inevitable yield of a season that has finally come. He reached for her hand, both of them ungloved, unceremonious, and held it with a tenderness that was clearly unfamiliar to him, something he was discovering even as he did it. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, then back up at her. "Will you permit me to speak with your father when he arrives?" The formality of the question sat at odds with the roughness still clinging to his voice. She found both qualities equally arresting. "Yes." He exhaled, long and slow, the breath of a man who had carried something beyond measure and was only now allowing himself to set it down. He raised her hand to his lips, pressed them to her knuckles, briefly, warmly, in the manner of a man who fully intended to have decades ahead in which to do this properly, and who was beginning now. "You should go back upstairs. It's past midnight, and I've already compromised your reputation by roughly 10 separate counts." "You knocked on the front door," she observed, her tone impeccably composed. "At midnight." "Without a hat?" The corner of his mouth lifted. There it was, the laugh she remembered from a decade ago, the one that remade him entirely, the most honest thing his face had ever done. "My mother is going to be insufferable about this." "Mine already is," he said. He laughed, a real laugh, the full, unguarded version, the one she had ached to hear again, a sound missing since 1800. It filled the grand entryway, settling inside her like a fragment long displaced, finally clicking into its rightful space. He let go of her hand. She climbed the staircase once more. At the top, she turned, because some things deserved to be said twice, carried forward across the years like a refrain. "Your Grace," she said. He looked up. "You really ought to have a hat made for this sort of waiting. You'll catch your death." "I shall have several made, as I understand it." "That is a very tender age to make such a commitment." "It is, but I reaffirm it every year." "Surely that counts for something." "It holds everything," he said. A smile opened across her lips. Not the measured, strategic expression she had worn throughout the season. A full, unshielded smile, the one she had kept in reserve for him alone. He folded the letter beneath his hand and set it aside, ending his afternoon's work, offering her his complete presence. Even now, months deep into their marriage, this undivided attention remained the thing she treasured most about belonging to him. The man who had spent 40 years holding the world at arm's length had mastered, with startling skill, the art of truly being there. Beyond the library windows, London moved through its autumn rhythms. The social season had run its course. Its assemblies and balls and card parties, those painstaking performances of availability and interest, all folded away until the following year. Autumn was sweeping down from the north, brushing the park's leaves with russet and copper, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke, casting that peculiar English light which turns every ordinary scene into something worthy of a painter's hand. Inside the library, the Duchess of Ashvale returned to her novel. The Duke of Ashvale returned to his letters, but after barely 4 minutes he abandoned them again, choosing instead to cross the room and settle beside his wife on the settee. This would have been an unthinkable act for the 9th Duke of Ashvale before the summer of 1810. Now he performed it with the easy grace of a man who has, at long last, found where he belongs. She rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes still tracing the page. He received the gesture without a word, a language complete unto itself. Some promises are made at 30 and honoured ever after. Some declarations spoken at 10 ring truer still at 20. And some affections arrive so steady, so exact, so unmistakably clear from their very first breath, that the years between serve not as delay, but simply as the time the slower of two hearts requires to finally catch up. By the time Ada and Maximilian settled into life at Ashvale Park, the wisteria along its southern facade had been climbing for 67 years. It had long passed the point where anyone could separate stone from vine. Certain bonds grow so deeply intertwined that the distinction itself ceases to matter. This, in the end, was precisely what Ada had known from the beginning.